everybody. Lance Russell and Dave Brown right along ringside. By golly, we're about ready to go with more big action.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Georgia Championship Wrestling. I'm Gordon Solie, your host, and we have quite an hour in store for us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Championship Wrestling at ringside. This is Vince McMahon, along with wrestling's only living legend, Bruno Sammartino.
Welcome to this week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, another outstanding card.
Hey, guys, and welcome back to the Regional Rasslin Podcast, where we talk the territories. I'm your host, as always, Ray Russell, and this week, we are going to deviate slightly from our typical format, going to push the current projects to the side this week in order to bring you a very special edition of Regional Rasslin, as this week, it's all about the brand new book, Professional Wrestling and the Law, the legal battles from the ring to the courtroom. And here to discuss said book is the author himself. Please welcome on. He is the Williford Gregg Distinguished Professor of Law at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville College of Law. He has published over 40 scholarly articles and books on legal topics, and the most recent of which, a book that takes a deep dive into the many different lawsuits, litigation, and legal battles from throughout the history of professional wrestling. He's not only an author, guys, but he's also a fan. Please welcome Alex Long to the program.
Thanks for having me, Ray. Looking forward to it.
Oh, looking forward to it. We've talked for a few weeks now through emails, and I got to read through your book, and then I got to go back over the book a second time last weekend. So I hope I'm prepared on my end for this, and what a venture it was. I go to Amazon to try to get a synopsis of the book, but I figured, why not hear it from the horse's mouth himself? I'm hoping you can share a little light on what this book is all about.
Yeah, so I'm a law professor, grew up as a wrestling fan, lifetime wrestling fan, and and over time, little stories would pop up involving wrestlers who got in trouble with the law in some way, shape, or form, or got tangled in the legal process. And it just sort of occurred to me over time, there's some interesting stories to tell. Somebody could write a pretty interesting book about this. And then I just sort of looked around and said, well, yeah, actually, maybe I'm the guy that can write a book about this. I've got the little bit of knowledge about the law, a little bit of knowledge about wrestling. And so I tried just to put together a book that deals with different legal issues or different topics, different legal theories. And for each of those topics or theories, I found a case or a series of cases maybe involving professional wrestling, and just sort of use those cases to go illustrate the legal principle while also hopefully telling just sort of a fun little history surrounding the case and the business.
Wrestlers in trouble with the law. Who'da thunk it?
Yeah, it's shocking, huh?
So this is not just a little half-assed book like we might see out there from other people. This is 250 pages of goodness, you guys. And you're not just glossing over some of these events, Alex. So you're deep diving into these things. Many instances even providing copies of documents and whatnot. So this is a very detailed book into lots of different things that went on in the world of professional wrestling involving the law.
Yeah, I tried not to half-ass it. I tried to whole-ass it. I was able.
I love it.
In some instances, I was able to get the original source documents. Right, I was able to. Down to the courthouse and get a hold of the trial transcript or the court filings or whatever. So yeah, some of these involve some pretty deep dives, I think.
Lending as much detail as possible into these. I loved it, from the Bayliner boat down to the Vince Russo and Hulk Hogan shenanigans in WCW 2000. So it's all in there, guys. You're definitely going to want to check it out. So I got to ask you, before we get going, and we'll talk about this at the end of the program as well, can you tell everybody where they can find this book?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon.com. And also through McFarland is the publisher, so McFarland.com, MC Farland with a D on the end, so McFarland.com.
Perhaps a silly question here, Alex, but given your background in law and fandom for wrestling, but what inspired you to write? Was there a specific tale, or was it just, like you said, a culmination throughout the years of, hey, I know this, I know that, and it made you just dangerous enough because you knew enough of each thing to kind of put it together here?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, there were all these stories that were sort of floating around that I knew about and I was interested in and wanted to dig a little deeper. I think the two things. The two events that kind of triggered the thought that maybe I could do this was, one, that Hulk Hogan litigation years ago in which he sued Gawker, the website that published the sex tape featuring him. And we were talking about invasion of privacy in one of my classes, and a couple students brought the case up to me and asked if I was familiar with it. Even though they didn't know I was a wrestling fan, they nonetheless asked me about the case because it was going on. And that's what sort of, I think, maybe triggered the initial impulse to do this. But the thing that really caused me to go forward, I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I teach at the University of Tennessee. And you mentioned that Bayliner boat litigation years ago, back in the 70s. There was the case involving Ron Fuller and the guys that broke off from his company there, and just, stumbled across a couple stories talking more about that incident. And I said, well, I live in Knoxville. I bet I could find out more about this. And so that was the other story that really just sort of prompted me to get into this.
See, guys, it all ties back to the territories here on Regional Rasslin. I love it. So, yeah, very good stuff. And I have a podcast with Bob Roop, and he's talked somewhat about that in the past, the whole situation. We're going to visit that a little more as we continue on with this episode. So I guess what you're saying is, other than the Hulkster-Gawker situation, this was kind of an obvious choice.
Yeah, I felt like it, right? I mean, there are a bunch of different legal issues out there that wrestlers have gotten involved in. And the more I looked into them, the more I thought they were interesting enough that lawyers as well as non-lawyers could get something out of it.
Oh, most definitely. So as I went through chapter after chapter in this book, and there were so many different processes through the law and the situations that were going on that you wrote about, you broke it down perfectly. So I was sitting here as I was reading this going, what was his writing process like? So I got to say, breaking the book up into so many different types of lawsuits, chapters, and how did you come about deciding exactly how many chapters you needed, or locating all the different lawsuits and mishaps?
Whew. Yeah, that's a good question. I wish I had some sort of grand theory when I started this, right? What my master plan was going to be. But it really didn't happen like that, right? It just sort of pieced its stuff together. There was stuff that I left out that I kind of wanted to talk about. I left out the Hulk Hogan and Gawker lawsuit, for example. Left out the whole Chris Benoit, tragedy there. I ended up not talking about that. But yeah, I wish I had a master plan. I really didn't. I just found cases that I was interested in, topics that I was interested in, and then just used all those legal research skills, hopefully, or semi skills that I picked up over the years, and just tried to dig in deep.
Of course, we already talked about the Bayliner boat that's been out there for years, and the Hogan and the WCW Vince Russo shenanigans, everything that went on with that. But what did you learn when writing this book? As a fan, did you find most of the research you did here to be a simple elaboration on what you had already heard about most of these incidents, or were you sometimes taken aback or at least surprised a little at the details within when you started diving into some of these?
Yeah, right. It's one thing to know the general sketch of a case or a story or whatever. It's another thing to actually get the source documents and see what people were really saying and what they were really doing. Like you mentioned the Bayliner boat incident. You dig into the actual transcript of that case, and it's a lot different than it's been portrayed on the internet. Or you look at you look at when the Poffos ended up suing the NWA, and I was able to get a hold of the deposition transcripts where Poffos lawyers were able to go depose these witnesses under oath, and you read what Jerry Lawler had to say about this, or what the original Sheik had to go say about it. And as you might imagine, the original Sheik was a pretty colorful character during that deposition, right? So it really brought to life these individuals and characters in a way that I hadn't really expected.
So out of all of the stories you cover there in your book, what surprised you, do you think, the most out of everything in the book?
That's a good question. The thing that originally surprised me the most was the extent to which back in the Kayfabe era that you had promoters, wrestlers, whoever, were so invested in maintaining Kayfabe that they'd commit perjury if necessary, right? I mean, there were some lawsuits in the 50s and 60s in which you had folks in the business who were testifying under oath in relation to some lawsuit that was going on. And yeah, they were willing. Hopefully they're dead and they can't sue me, but they were willing to go commit perjury to go protect the business. And so just the commitment, I suppose, to kayfabe in the face of legal proceedings, I think probably was the thing that surprised me the most as I worked through the book.
And as we continue on with this episode, we're going to find out a few promoters may have decided to break kayfabe in order to get what they wanted out of the lawsuits. So that's
which was also kind of a surprise too.
It was surprising to me, but also very interesting because at the end of the day, we see what they're out for, right? So we kind of see where the line is drawn when it comes to breaking kayfabe with at least some of the promoters here that we're going to discuss this week. And this being a regional wrestling type of podcast, guys, we are going to dive into some territory topics here this week. So Alex, I was hoping to cover just a few of the topics here this week with you, kind of go over. We won't tell all the story, but man, it's so deep and there's so much information we could never get through the entire story here, but we're going to do a little breakdown on some of these. Obviously, everybody out there listening are huge fans of the territory era. So I was hoping we could kick off with some of the stuff early on in your book, the early years, the territory era. And as you were just talking about, maintaining kayfabe. So the tension between the wrestling business trying to mainstream kayfabe while, as you said, embroiled in the legal process. And that included the Bayliner boat incident. And that's all over the place. It's been online for 20, 25 years. Of course, as you said, it's just a general synopsis of what went down and some of it, some mistruths in between, as usual, when telling wrestling stories. But I was curious. I wanted to get you to your breakdown on how this was laid out.
Yeah, so the story, as I've always seen it, at least online, was that Ron Fuller back in the 70s had this territory in Knoxville, and some guys broke away from the territory, right? You had Ron Garvin, Bob Roop, Orton.
Malenko, yes.
Yeah, Malenko, exactly. Yeah, Malenko. And they broke away, and Garvin was the champion at the time. He kept the belt, didn't give the belt back. And they started this opposition territory in the same area, and were pretty aggressive in their opposition. There were lots of negative statements that they would make about Fuller in the paper or whatever, and sort of went after Fuller's organization. But the Bayliner boat litigation resulted from the fact that Fuller had loaned Ronnie Garvin $12,000 so that Garvin could go buy a new boat. And they concocted this scheme, right, where they would have what they were going to call the Bayliner boat tournament, and the winner of the Bayliner boat tournament was going to win this boat, supposedly. But in reality, that wasn't going to happen. What was going to happen is they were just going to use this new boat that Ronnie Garvin was going to buy and use that to sort of advertise this as the boat that the winner's going to get. But Fuller had loaned Garvin this $12,000 before Garvin left the territory. And of course, after Garvin left the territory, he didn't pay Fuller back the $12,000.
Right.
He kept the boat, and he kept the title belt that he had. So Fuller takes him to court to get the $12,000 back. He also gets a hold of the boat, which was interesting, but at least for a little while. But he sues to get the $12,000 back. He sues to get the boat back. And the way the story's always been presented, at least as I've seen it online, is that Fuller lost the suit because he had to maintain kayfabe, wouldn't admit that this entire Bayliner boat tournament was a work, right? When you read the trial transcript, that's actually not what happened.
It's about the opposite.
Fuller, Garvin's lawyer asked Fuller in some detail about the details of the transaction and the tournament. Yeah, and Fuller owned up to it. Fuller said, "Yeah, this was a work, basically."
Yeah, I love. I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize, but I just wanted to say I love that you added some of the transcript into the book so that people can see what was exactly asked and how Fuller answered it. Was it predetermined who was going to win the tournament? Fuller simply replied, "Yes." So, and it goes on from there, but that's just the beginning of the excerpt that I have here in my notes.
Yeah. Again, when you're actually able to read the transcripts and read the original documents, I think history sort of comes to life in a way that it doesn't when you just read about it on the internet, right? So, yeah, the transcript was just really enlightening, and to watch the way that the two lawyers involved in the case approached it. Fuller's lawyer didn't seem to know what that question was coming. It seemed like that one caught him off guard, and that ended up turning the case against Fuller, and ultimately is part of the reason why he lost the case.
Do you think Ron didn't see that coming, and thus he never really filled his attorney in on, the entire logistics of professional wrestling?
I don't know what happened in that case, and I would really like to find out. Most of the lawyers involved are no longer with us or have moved on. So I can't really know for sure what happened. But yeah, my thought is that perhaps Fuller's lawyer just didn't think it was going to come up and didn't really prepare Fuller for that question. And when he got hit with it, he instinctively, probably counterintuitively for a wrestler, told the truth. And it was kind of shocking to read the transcript.
Well, I can tell the truth when there's money involved, especially $12,000. To break it down for everybody out there, $12,000 in 1979 money. I did the old inflation calculator gimmick last night. That's over $50,000 today that Ron Fuller loaned Ronnie Garvin. And why don't you tell them how he gave Garvin the money, Alex?
Put it in a brown paper bag, took it over to Garvin's apartment, put it in a brown paper bag, and left with his girlfriend, I think. But yeah.
When Bob Roop told that part of the story on his show prior, I often wondered, Bob, now I know that's what you heard, but did he really give him $12,000 in a paper bag? But nope, right here in the transcript in court, Ron Fuller admits to handing Ronnie Garvin a paper bag full of cash. Now that doesn't sound shady, does it?
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
The name of this chapter is actually Kayfabe and the Doctrine of Unclean Hands. Can you explain to everybody out there what unclean hands, the term, means?
Yeah, so it's just a legal theory that if you're going to come to court with your hands out to the court asking the court for help, your hands better be clean. You better not have done anything fraudulent that sort of cuts against you being able to recover. So in this case, once it came out that wrestling was a work, and that the Baylor boat tournament was a work, and that the outcome was predetermined, the judge in the case said to Fuller, "You've basically come here with unclean hands. You want money back from you're trying to collect money from this guy, yet you're coming to us with unclean hands. You've committed a fraud upon the public, basically, and so we're not going to let you recover for that."
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And Ronnie Garvin actually retains the Southeastern title, Ron Fuller's title. Ronnie Garvin gets to keep that. It's not even really discussed. Like, they're so busy dealing with the $12,000 and the boat and everything in this. The judge really never seems to rule on the Southeastern title. And Ronnie Garvin got to hold on to that till the 2000s when he sells it on eBay.
Yeah. Somehow that part of the case just sort of dropped out. But yeah, Garvin got to keep the belt.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane, just the stuff that went on back then in the story. Like you said, and again, I want to go back. It's just worth the money, the price of the book alone, just this Bayliner boat story. It kicks off the entire book. Really great stuff, very deep in detail here. And again, the transcripts are in there of Ron Fuller up on the witness stand. I would just love to go back in time and see, a picture of that. Ron Fuller up there having to answer these questions. But just insane. Was it a work? Yes. Did he actually purchase the boat? You had no intentions. So basically what they were saying here is, you said, wrestling's a work, and you knew in advance who the winner was going to be. Nobody was actually going to win this boat. And so that kind of just threw everything wonky here right in the legal process. And the judge basically dismisses it, throws it out. Ronnie Garvin keeps the boat, no?
Yeah, Ronnie Garvin gets the boat back. He keeps the belt and keeps the $12,000 as well.
Amazing.
Right? So,
absolutely amazing. And Fuller's still picking fights with Bob Roop today, but he's cool with Ronnie Garvin. Maybe respects him for all of that. I don't know. The mindset of a pro wrestler.
Yeah.
But so that was just the beginning of the book. There's so much else in here, including you got another piece, another chapter, employees or independent contractors we talk about later in the book, breaking down what classifies someone as an independent contractor.
Yeah, so this has always been an issue, and there have been actually a decent number of folks who have written, scholarly papers and stuff on whether wrestlers should be classified as employees or independent contractors. And the reason why it matters is employees just have got more rights under the law than independent contractors do. All the various state and federal statutes out there protect employees, but typically don't protect independent contractors. So wrestlers would, in a lot of cases, probably benefit from being classified as an employee rather than independent contractors. That said, throughout all of modern wrestling history, at least, wrestlers have been categorized as independent contractors, both by the promoters and by courts. And so the end result of that is they typically don't have the same legal protection, the same legal rights that an employee would. And so this chapter just sort of dives into, should a wrestler be classified as an employee or an independent contractor? And so I use some of the decisions out there that have discussed those issues to flesh that out a little bit.
Now, there was an issue that took place way back in November of 1986 involving Hollywood John Tatum, who was working for Bill Watts and his UWF at the time. Tatum had been driving down the road, perhaps inebriated to some degree, and he gets into a head-on car collision with another car, killing, I believe, the driver of the other car, as well as his Tatum at the time had a pregnant girlfriend with him, and she suffered a miscarriage in that situation. Now, it took years to go to court, but then I was scrolling through, and I was really grateful that we got some information as to what happened in the court with this situation. And I really popped for the fact that Bill Watts gets involved in what you dubbed White versus John E. Frankel, a.k.a. Hollywood John Tatum.
Yeah. So, what ends up happening, like you said, after the accident, the family of the other driver who died, and then Tatum's girlfriend at the time, sue Tatum for negligence in this case. And they sue Mid-South. They sue Watts and Mid-South, trying to hold Mid-South liable or responsible for Tatum's actions. And again, it comes down to whether Tatum is an employee or whether he's an independent contractor. If he's an independent contractor, then Mid-South can't be responsible for his actions. If he's an employee, then Mid-South is responsible for his actions, and Bill Watts is going to have to go pay whatever the jury sets as the damages in the case. And so a lot of what the case boils down to is whether Tatum was an employee or an independent contractor. And as a legal matter, the key question in all these cases is typically how much control did the employer have over the way the worker did the job? Does the employer tell the employee, or does the employer tell the worker when to do it, where to do it, and how to do it, right? And in this particular case, the testimony comes out from Tatum's girlfriend, and Bill Watts that, basically Bill Watts dictates exactly what happens in Mid-South. He tells you when you're going to wrestle, where you're going to wrestle, where you are on the card, who's going to win, who's going to lose, how much money you make, all the stuff that we know that promoters decided comes out in that lawsuit. And so, you get a nice little peek behind the curtain in the judicial opinion in this case as to how Mid-South operated, and then what the reality is in terms of the control that promoters had over wrestlers. Because when you get right down to it, clearly Watts controlled what was happening. So the court says Tatum's an employee in this case, and so Mid-South can be held responsible.
And here's a mind blower. It was for me. I don't know why, but when I was reading this particular chapter in the book, not only did Tatum testify, not only did his girlfriend or ex at the time, because it was several years later, I'm not really sure how that was, but not only did they testify that wrestling's a work and, hey, Bill Watts was the boss, he told us where to go, he told us who was winning the matches, but they actually call the cowboy himself, Bill Watts, to the court. And at this point, by 1993, even the cowboy felt comfortable enough to disclose some of the secrets of the business. I couldn't believe it. The cowboy breaking kayfabe. Wrestling was real all those years, and here just a few years later, Bill Watts, this is probably right after his WCW run, so maybe a little bitter too, but the cowboy coming to court, and he's telling everybody, I was in control of all those things.
Yeah, if you were going to guess one promoter who might not want to break kayfabe at this point, it still might have been Bill Watts, but he did. Yeah, so it was back in 1989 that Vince McMahon went public with the fact that outcomes in matches were predetermined, and so that he blows the lid off of there in 1989. So the trial doesn't take place in the John Tatum case until after Vince McMahon has already come forward with the fact that wrestling is a work. So, I guess both Tatum and Watts just figured out, well, everybody knows at this point I'm not going to risk a perjury charge, and they went ahead and came forward with what the reality was.
And just a fun little side note to all the territory fans out there. I find this very interesting because I hadn't read the part about John Tatum's girlfriend being pregnant in the past when I, studied this whole situation. And as I do the math here, November of 1986, he had just been with Missy Hyatt to the month prior when Eddie Gilbert kind of stole him away from Tatum. And here he is with a new girlfriend already, and she's pregnant. So don't feel so bad for Hollywood John, guys.
I was going to ask you about that because I was doing that same math in my head when I was writing this. I said, was he still with Missy Hyatt at this point? And I went back and looked at some of the old matches, and it had already ended by that
Very
point.
close. Very close, though.
Yeah.
So if for everybody that envisioned John in a hotel room somewhere moping after Missy left him, probably not.
Yeah, and according to the opinion, she had ridden with him, I think, like 30 times or something in between matches. So, yeah, it had been going on for a month or so by that point.
Gotcha.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Rasslin podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Rasslin. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Rasslin Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Rasslin Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Rasslin Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron. I'm talking about that $5 all access tier over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Rasslin, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. We also offer remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show, covering the 1989 NWA project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series, covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. And for those who like all of their podcasts in one nice, neat little pile, the WrestleCopia Patreon also offers a Patreon exclusive Spotify account. You can actually go over to your Spotify with your WrestleCopia Patreon credentials. Instead of listening or downloading directly from Patreon, you can go over to Spotify, listen to all the latest shows, including all of the early releases. And you get all of that and so much more for just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia podcast network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/WrestlePod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, where we go, what do we do? Be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
So another chapter, a full chapter, actually focuses on the antitrust and enforcement with contractual relations, i.e. the Poffos, the Poffo family, that's Angelo, Lanny, and of course, the Macho Man Randy Savage, versus everybody. I love the title of this part of the chapter, the Poffos versus everyone.
Yeah, so the Poffos sued pretty much everybody who happened to be in the NWA at the time. You look at the complaint, and it's pretty much every promoter in the NWA that they sue for violating antitrust and competition law.
Well, not just the promoters. I'm seeing bookers. I'm seeing sons of promoter. I mean, George Goulas is listed. Tom Ernesto, who was simply a booker at the time. Angelo and company, they were super detailed in who they were suing. Even taking on the WWA Indianapolis at this point. I mean, come on, guys. Moving into the 80s. Yeah. Not only Richard Afflis, Dick the Bruiser, but even listing Wilbur Snyder, who had a piece of the pie there. So yeah, everybody was on it was literally the Poffos versus everyone. I loved it.
Yep, that's exactly right. And it was fascinating to see them just attack the world, basically, of professional wrestling at the time.
So they really started up against Jerry Jarrett and, of course, Nick Goulas there in the Kentucky and Tennessee territories, and back in 1979, even aligning themselves with Bob Roop and company, the All-Star Group, turned into ICW. But suing all of these guys from Tom Ernesto all the way down to Bob Geigel is absolutely hilarious. When you look at the sheets here, you actually have copies of them right here in the book.
Yeah. Like you said, they originally, their primary beef was with Jarrett and Goulas, and I think Jarrett in particular, because there was a lot of overlap there in the Kentucky and Tennessee territories, as you said. But their beef with everybody else, Dick the Bruiser or whoever, was supposedly right that they were running competition against Jarrett and Goulas, and so Jarrett and Goulas and the other members of the NWA all banded together the way that they all said they would, right, and tried to go protect Jarrett and Goulas's territory, or that's the allegation, or at least, right? So they would blacklist wrestlers who worked for the Poffos and wouldn't book them in their own territories.
And by this point, Jarrett is separated away from Nick Goulas by a couple of years here. So they're actually going after everyone in the Tennessee territory, not just one promotion. But again, it goes back to, we've heard the stories. I've talked about it at length on the Wrestling Stoop with Bob in regards to the NWA and the outlaw territories, now known as independents, guys. But back then, it was a no-no to run a wrestling company unless you were part of the NWA. And if you were successful in any degree, as we found out with poor Ann Gunkel, and that everything that went on there in the early 80s in the Georgia War, which we also discussed recently here on the program, you know that the NWA will conspire the best they can. They will get together with all of the different promoters of the NWA. And I found it odd, too, that Vern Gagne, who was not in the NWA, but did attend some of the events that the boys would hold. But even he was listed in that docket. So again, Poffo versus the world, but I go back to the fact that it's basically a monopoly was the NWA, and they would send the troops. You're in trouble. You got somebody competing against you. We'll send in the world champion. We'll send in, some top draws and try to shut them down, run them out of town.
Yeah, and that I learned a good bit about the law here. Actually, I knew about the basic structure and organization of the NWA and what their strategy was when it came to dealing with outlaw promoters. But I learned more about the law in this area than I did probably in any other part of the book, and pretty quickly realized that the entire operating procedure of the National Wrestling Alliance was just blatantly illegal under federal law. The Sherman Act just pretty much lays out all the things that make a monopoly and that make anti-competitive behavior, and the NWA just checked pretty much every single box. Yeah, I was reading, you had the list here of all of the things that would make you a monopoly, and I mean, I was just check as I was going down the list here in the book, and it was amazing. And it's no shocker. I'm sure people know in hindsight now what the NWA was and what it did, what the boys did, the promoters, that is. And so it's kind of fun to see the Poffos getting involved here. And that suit, that's going to go on from 79. It's not going to be dismissed until 1982. But in the midst of all of that, there's a very interesting deposition that is in your book, verbatim. I'm talking about an interview they did with the Sheik himself, Ed Farhat, forced to break character and interviewed in the court of law. Yeah, so Farhat was on the outs with the NWA at that point, so it didn't seem like he had any reservations about speaking about what was really going on in the NWA. And during his deposition, he takes some pretty direct shots at the NWA itself. And at times he's somewhat sympathetic to the Poffos, and then boy, at other times he is not at all sympathetic to their lawyer because he gets really angry with their lawyer. And so I just thought that his deposition was so entertaining that I'd include a few pages of it in there. But yeah, if you read, he just sort of goes off on the Poffos lawyer at a few points during this formal sworn deposition. It's pretty fun to read.
I got to tell everybody, I mean, this is a great book. Again, 250 pages, but if for nothing else, you got to get the book just to read the Sheik basically being questioned by an attorney here. And his responses, as you said, are just hilarious. It's great read. It's great stuff. And it actually happened, guys. This isn't made up. So these are actually copies of the actual transcript of what was being said. And I couldn't believe it. I got through the second page before I said, wait a minute, is this the Sheik? I was trying to, I went back and I had to double check and I go, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. So I love the fact that you included that in the book.
Yeah, my favorite part of that, I think, was when the Poffos lawyer asked him if he was a good guy or a bad guy, and he says, "That's none of your business." I'm just not going to answer your question. So it was great.
So, besides the Poffos, who had worked closely with the Knoxville Five, the All-Star promotion in 1979, obviously that's going to be absorbed into the ICW, the Poffo promotion. But there was also a Southeastern, which is Fuller's group, versus All-Star lawsuit.
Yeah, so the Poffos and then the Knoxville Five, the group that broke off there from Fuller, they would run these shows in the same basic territory, right? And they would advertise them in what Fuller said was a misleading way, and I think he had a point. There would be advertisements in which they would refer to someone as being the Southeastern champion, for example, even though they really weren't part of the NWA Southeastern at that point. And then in a few advertisements, they would advertise, Bob Orton versus Ron Fuller if Ron Fuller shows up.
The basically chicken challenge, right?
Yeah, chicken challenge, exactly. Taunting Fuller into hopefully maybe showing up, or if not, at least getting the folks to attending thinking maybe Fuller might show up, right? I mean, the idea, Fuller argued, was that they were trying to lure fans under the false pretense that Fuller might actually show up for these events. So yeah, he sues them for that, for using his name and using the name of NWA Southeastern basically as false advertising, but they were using his name and persona to make a buck, which is a form of an invasion of privacy claim.
It's so crazy too. The more things change, the more they stay the same. I think about many years later during the Monday Night War, Eric Bischoff challenging Vince McMahon to a match on a pay-per-view, knowing full well, I wish he had shown up, but I mean, what a buy rate that would have been. But so Bischoff basically never alluding that Vince would actually be there. And I think, we knew, even as a teenager, I knew that he wasn't going to show up. There's no way Vince was going to go over to WCW. But at the same time, it's very similar in fashion that, hey, this weekend, this Sunday at the pay-per-view, I challenge Vince McMahon to a fight. And if he has the guts to show up. So I could see the WWF at that time, if Vince thought he had a way to get some money out of that, a lawsuit with that, I'm sure they did something similar in return, a little retort by Vince McMahon, like, hey, wait a minute, pal, you're trying to make money off me now. But I don't really remember how that happened, how that ended. I'd have to go back and look into that. But it's just funny. This happens back in 79, and they were doing it 20 years later. Yeah, and in ECW as well, right? I mean, Shane Douglas made a living trashing Ric Flair on ECW microphones too, right? So yeah, it's in a way it's part of the business, but yeah, it also does raise some questions about whether it's really fair or legal to mislead in that way and to use somebody else's name to help you sell tickets or pay-per-view buys. Well, we've talked about the Poffos, we've talked about the Fullers, we even got to talk a little bit about Hollywood John Tatum, one of my guilty pleasures growing up, but we talked a lot about the men. Why don't we pivot here and talk a little bit about the ladies of professional wrestling, the old sexual discrimination, the constitutional laws, lady wrestlers, ban, really when it comes down to it, the ban on women's wrestling, which took place for much of the 1900s in many of the states. Yeah, so this was probably the other chapter where I learned the most just in terms of the facts. This was an area I just didn't really know a whole lot about. And I'm sitting here, I can't even remember really what sort of triggered me to go do more research into it. But the more research I did, the more interesting I found it. Up until 1972 or 1971, I can't remember, women's wrestling was banned in New York, and it was also banned in a bunch of other states. Right. There were some states where it was allowed, but Illinois, up until the 1960s, it was banned there. New York until the 1970s, and I guess I didn't realize the full extent to which that was the case. And so that chapter just goes into the various lawsuits that some of the women wrestlers filed, challenging these laws that prohibited them from wrestling, and the claim that they violated the Constitution. So it was really fascinating to go back and read some of the history there. Yeah, honestly, women's wrestling, unfortunately, was used basically as a novelty act on the show, much like the midget wrestling and things of that nature, wrestlers versus bears and things like that. The women would come into town, and they never really got the storylines. They just kind of come in, hey, the ladies are here this week. But that didn't happen everywhere, as you just said. I was reading your book again just a few days ago, and I wanted to go back over this chapter, and it was crazy to look throughout even the 50s, the 60s. It says it started all the way back in the 40s, ladies trying to wrestle in Oregon. And this was a crazy story that I read about a couple of ladies there. At one point in the 50s, they were told, if you go out there and wrestle, you will be arrested. And these ladies, they took a stand. They went out there and wrestled, and I guess they were arrested. Yeah, it was, civil disobedience in professional wrestling, right? I mean, they knew they would promote these events, and yeah, it was pretty common from what I can see in this area in Oregon for there'd be women's wrestling, and there were storylines, right? It was actually a part of the weekly cards, and there was a law that prohibited them from doing it, and they were told basically, as you said, if you wrestle this weekend, we're going to arrest you. And they went ahead and did it, and I got taken out in handcuffs, which is what led to the lawsuit that they filed challenging the constitutionality of that Oregon statute. And, the ladies' argument were back in the 50s, hey, if we're able to rivet, we can wrestle. And really, when you think, what harm is it doing to have the ladies out there having a wrestling match? So it felt more about like the big men in politics just showing their hand, forcing their hand, basically saying, if we say something, you better respond accordingly. Yeah, and you made the point, right, that during World War II, women's wrestling sort of took off in part because there were fewer men to go out and wrestle. But you had women who were going on the assembly line and they were going into the wrestling ring. But when that World War II ends, you start getting more states banning women's wrestling, usually for reasons that are kind of laughable today, right? That one of the arguments that that the authorities in the state would make is that wrestling was going to likely lead to breast cancer, that women were going to develop breast cancer as a result of these wrestling matches. And, there's no scientific basis for that whatsoever. But those were the arguments that they would sort of make. And courts were pretty receptive to those kinds of arguments. Yeah, it's like, this is, the state's got the right to say,
who can engage in this practice and who can't. And even if we don't think their reasons are all that great, we're not gonna go second guess their judgment in these cases. So for a long time, at least, courts were willing to support these bans on women's wrestling.
So it's kind of crazy to think about how ahead of times New York City was throughout the decades of the 1900s. Everything was happening there first before it took over the rest of the nation. And so you would have expected ladies wrestling to be welcome in the state of New York going back to at least the 50s or the 60s. But it wasn't until the 70s that the ladies, as you said, were permitted to wrestle inside the state of New York. And so thus, we don't see any women's wrestling in Madison Square Garden and the like until 1972. But some real trendsetters here, and I have to put her name over here. Betty Niccoli, who's one of the originals, her name, beautiful lady for the time in professional wrestling, and she wanted so badly to wrestle in the state of New York. Her and a couple of other ladies, they created this women's liberation movement versus the New York State Athletic Commission.
Yeah, she ends up sort of being one of my heroes that comes out of that chapter. She and the wrestler from Oregon, Jerry Hunter, I think are kind of badasses for doing what they did. But yeah, they filed suit. So several women filed suit in New York. Took a long time, but eventually it worked, and it was Moolah, Fabulous Moolah, who got the first match in New York, at least the first sanctioned match. Yeah, imagine. Yeah, shocking that Moolah ends up reaping the benefits of this, but she was able to reap the benefits because of people who came before, like Betty and some of the others.
And of course, in Moolah's book, she takes credit for getting the ban lifted on ladies wrestling in New York, because of course she does. But I love the fact that you prominently featured Betty Niccoli throughout this chapter, because she was a trendsetter. She was a trailblazer for what she was able to help accomplish there in getting women's wrestling into New York, but also just fighting the good cause for the ladies in general. She basically walked so the women today could run in the Northeast.
Yeah, that's exactly right. She was willing to go out in public and go fight for this. And so, yeah, my hat's off to her and some of the other folks in that chapter.
Very big kudos there. So, I thought we covered some fun bases here in regards to the territory stuff, even the ladies getting involved here and what they had to put up with before they, really broke out in the 1970s. And of course, look where they are today.
Yeah, women's wrestling takes place in the Olympics now. It takes place in college, so it weirdly, professional wrestling, I think, kind of opened up doors for amateur wrestling and to women's amateur wrestling to become more prominent than it once was.
Whew, man, there's so much good stuff in this book. I'm actually going to have to go back and read it because there's so many different types of lawsuits and things going on. There's bits and pieces I don't recall that I definitely got to go back and read certain aspects of the book again, because I really want to learn a little more, not just about the law, but what really went on versus some of the stories we have been told over the years on the Wrestling Classics board or Kayfabe memories and things, guys who remember it their way. And some of the pieces are right, but as you said, as you went to diving in, it's like, well, parts of it are correct, but maybe there's some false stories involved in the middle here, and maybe not the whole truth was out there. And I love the fact that you've put the whole truth out there on so many different lawsuits and litigations and everything in between.
Yeah, it was a blast to do. It was a labor of love. There were times when I was kind of regretting that I got started on it, because it ended up being more work than I thought it was going to be. But it was good work. It was fun work.
I hate when that happens. Happens to me all the time. It's like, oh man, I didn't intend for all this, but yeah. I'm happy that it happened to you, because I'm better for it, and anybody who reads this book is going to be better for it too. And for all of you youngins out there who may have been born or started watching wrestling just after the territory era, there's some fun stuff in there as well in regards to Hulk Hogan, that whole WCW Vince Russo lawsuit thing, but other things as well. Alex, do you want to give them just a brief overview of some of the other topics in the book?
Yeah, so there's a chapter in there about all the concussion litigation that the professional wrestlers brought against WWE. Chapters in there about some race discrimination, which goes back in time a little bit. There's it's an early chapter, still back in the territory days, back in the Crockett promotion, where Sweet Stan Lane goes into the crowd in West Virginia and beats up a guy in the crowd, and the litigation that results from that is pretty funny. It's peak Jim Cornette at various points in the litigation there.
Isn't Jim Cornette still peaking? I mean, I think he still brings this story up from time to time. And yeah, you go into detail about that one. And I'm sure anybody who's ever listened to the Cornette podcast or anytime Cornette's talked about it, this is for you. You definitely want to go get this book. And it's a super detailed version of the accounts and everything that follows involving Stan Lane and said fan. And just wow, what a time to be in the world of wrestling.
Oh, I wish I could have been a part of it back then, right? I'd be back in 1987 in Beckley, West Virginia in the Crockett promotion. Oh my gosh, how much fun would that have been?
Well, man, you make me want to go read it right now again. Just some of this stuff it's not just informative, man. There's plenty of entertainment involved, lots of laughs, and the wrestlers forced to laugh sometimes. You don't have to write it. You don't have to go into too much work on your end, Alex, to make people chuckle.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Especially Ed Farhat, the Sheik, breaking character and having his way. I bet that attorney screwed with the wrong man. He found out about that. But I was going to ask you, what was the best advice you would give a new writer? But I think you might have already said it when you basically said, well, I started writing this book and it became a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. And that's kind of be prepared is what I would tell a new writer. But I want to get your version of what you think best advice to give a new writer out there.
Yeah, I guess I give two pieces of advice. I mean, one, write about something you care about. It just makes it a whole lot easier when it goes on and on and on. It's a whole lot easier to make your way through it if you actually care about the thing you're writing about, right? If you love it, it ceases to be labor. It just becomes a labor of love. And the second thing I guess I would say is be prepared to dig in perhaps more than you thought. I mean, I think it's good to have a plan, good to have an organization. But no matter how well thought out your plan is, you're going to go in some directions and routes you never imagined yourself going and going down some rabbit holes you never thought. But sometimes that's where the fun stuff is. Like I never would have imagined all the Ed Farhat stuff in the deposition would have been there, but there it was, and I wouldn't have found that if I hadn't just kept digging. So yeah, be prepared for the work, but make sure it's work that you love doing.
Well, 250 pages in. And you left me wanting more. So I have to ask the question, as any wrestling fan would, will there be a part 2? Is there enough out there for maybe down the line when time permits? Do you think maybe we'll see a part 2 of this type of book?
I got a few more cases I've thought about that I didn't include. So yeah, it's a possibility. Once I maybe take a breather and recoup from this experiment, I may do a sequel. We'll see.
Yeah, I wasn't in a rush. I know, a writer, certainly someone doing the research that you're doing needs that time to rest in the brain and just do some other things in life. And of course, you got your hands full anyway with what you got going on outside of writing said wrestling books. But man, I appreciate it enough. Hopefully we see another one down the road, but I'm just thankful for what you did here for us, the fans, and just kind of open the world of lawsuits and litigation and things of that nature for us. And I can't recommend this book. Excellent, excellent book. Once again, Professional Wrestling and the Law, Legal Battles from the Ring to the Courtroom. And Alex, once again, please tell everyone where they can find this book.
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon.com or you can find it at McFarland.com. Both available there.
Oh, excellent, excellent. And do you want to give out any of your social media information or any way people can contact you if need be?
Yeah, so you can find me online. I'm on Twitter at Alex B. Long Alex B. That's at Alex B. Long Alex B.
Alrighty. So that's going to wrap it up here this week. Alex, I know you're a busy man and you got some things going on here very shortly, but I want to thank you very much for spending time here on Regional Rasslin discussing your book. And again, hopefully a part 2 down the line. But right now, I encourage everybody to go out there, grab this book. It's the next great read here in the world of professional wrestling. Alex, thank you so much for being here on the program.
Oh, thank you. I had a blast, and thanks for all the good work that you do at your site. I think it's a great place to go visit. So thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, guys, that'll do it here this week, but we shall return for more Georgia 81, Memphis 85, and UWF 86 very soon. I'm your host, Ray Russell. You can follow me on X at Rasslin Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Rasslin Grenade. And don't forget that $5 all access tier over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. And until next time, we'll be back soon with more Regional Rasslin, where we talk the territories.